Cool. So yeah, so this is, like I mentioned, this is the last week of class. This is a pretty short class and we've sort of packed in a lot of stuff. So my hope is that even if you couldn't get with everything over the last 3 weeks, that you sort of maybe sit with it, give yourself a little bit of time off, come back to it, watch some videos. Again, all the videos are available to you, so you can always come back and review stuff. And Leah and I are always available if you have other questions. Yeah, so let's look at what we're gonna work on today. All right, so as I mentioned, this week we're gonna look at some stuff called chaining, and then we're gonna look at some of the plugins available. So we'll look at the Photoshop plugin, and then we'll also look at using P5.js, which is like a JavaScript application that's sort of similar to processing, as a way to talk to Runway. And I'll sort of show you how and why that works, and like why it's probably more powerful to do certain things if you're interested in that. And as I mentioned, sign up for our one-on-ones. There's links in the slide deck, and we'll post them in the Slack channel as well to sign up for a one-on-one with either Leah or I. So today, we're going to go through we'll quickly touch on training. So as I mentioned, Chris from Runway was really nice enough to offer, I don't know exactly what he's offering. I don't know if it's like a free training session or like a month of the creator plan or whatever, but if you haven't sent me your email address yet, please do. I'll send that to Chris after class today, and he'll do whatever in your account to make sure that you get a little bit of bonus material. So we weren't going to cover training in this class, but we'll quickly touch on it in the first like 5 minutes, just to sort of go over like how it works, why it works, and we've got some resources already available if you're interested in those materials. Then we're going to go over training. We'll do a quick demo with that. And then we'll look at the Runway plugins or integrations, that sort of thing. We'll take a break. We'll probably spend a good chunk of time looking at interpolation. So you can already do this in Runway, but we're going to show you a new method to be able to do it inside of inside of P5.js, or like use another tool to manage and manipulate latent spaces within Runway. And then we'll do a quick thing around hosted models. So if you want to build a website from your Runway model, you can do that now. And then we'll also talk at the very end of class about sort of like additional learning materials if you're interested in continuing along and learning more about machine learning and art. All right. Leah, should I just cover this since it's pretty short?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, cool. All right, so training. So again, we've got a bunch of different videos on basically making a data set or training your own model. Because this is a shortened class, we sort of decided to skip on this section, just because honestly, building a data set is the hardest part. But if you are interested in doing your own training and you like can put together a data set, there is a Runway setup like to do your own training in StyleGAN. It's actually pretty nice. I mean, I think, there's a lot of positives over using Runway system over others. One is it is GUI based, so there is like a nice graphic interface, which you do not get in other training setups. Runway is pretty fast. Like it trains overnight, like so in 6 to 8 hours, or instead of like some of the machines I use tend to take like days. So it is pretty nice. The price is actually fairly comparable, depending on how many steps you run it for. So the price in Runway, I believe, is ½ cent per step, and steps are how long it trains for. So that generally means that I think, what is it, like a 6,000 step training costs $30, which is pretty good. That's actually a fairly reasonable price. One thing to remember when you are training is you probably want to back up all your files, so you want to download stuff, and there's links in videos to all of that material if you're interested in that. So the costs, obviously, like Chris is going to set you guys up with something, but if you want to do more than one training, or I think it might be maybe a free month or something, if you want to do something beyond that, you will have to sign up for their creator plan, which is, I think, $15 a month, or they have an annual rate that's a little bit less than that. So basically you pay for that, and that just gives you access to training. So on top of that, you also get, you will then have to pay this ½ cent per step training fee. One thing that is nice about the creator plan, like I'm on the creator plan, is that it gives you a bonus credit. So like if you're in New York and you know what the MTA like train credit is, where you like give it 20 bucks and you get like $1.50 back or whatever, it's a similar setup to that. So you pay for credits in their system and they give you like a bonus amount of credits. So it does, I won't say it pays for itself, but it does like have some additional bonuses that make it worthwhile if you want to go down that path. So, you know, realistically, like because I teach these classes, because I use Runway a lot, I probably go through like $100 in credits like every month or two. I doubt many of you will go through that much. So this is it's a nice setup if you're interested in it, and especially if you're going to use it pretty frequently. So there are some videos here on how to do training. Recommend checking those out. We'll link to them in our class notes as well as putting them in the slide deck. There's one, so basically I usually teach a 5-week class of this. And those extra 2 weeks are making your own data set and then training a model. So those 2 weeks we'll have videos for those, so you can go ahead and watch them. And that covers training. Has anyone tried to do a training yet or have questions about training?
Yeah, I gave it a go. It wasn't that successful. Just
Yeah.
probably, but I was going to ask, what did they mean by step? You said it's like 0.5% per step or something, yeah?
Yeah, so steps are a thing you set within within the StyleGAN model or within any training. And all a step is, and like we haven't really talked about how a model trains, but a step is essentially the model looks at a bunch of data and then it does a process called backpropagation, and that is a process where it like sort of it makes a guess and then it learns how well it did. That is a step. So basically it does this guess, it learns how well it did, and then there's a thing called backpropagation, which is basically it takes all of the information about what it didn't do well and pushes it back through the system. So that's a step. So each step, it learns something new. And, you know, Runway actually does it slightly differently than a traditional StyleGAN model does in the ways that they count things. But that's all a step is. I would say like minimum, you need to do 3,000 steps for any model. I generally prefer to shoot around for 5,000 or 6,000 steps. I find that that gets me like a well-trained model. So how long you train it for matters. How big your data set is matters. So in most of these examples, I recommend that your data set be at least 1,000 images. And I know that's why this is the hardest thing to do, and why we decided to pass on it for this class. But yeah, that's sort of how I would think about it.
Okay. Cool.
I tried the training too with a bunch of photos, like 50 photos from football teams from the 80s. Mm-hmm. And they were pretty similar, but yeah. It ended up like a Rorschach animation or something like that because I believe that I need more photos. But it looks nice, but it wasn't what I was expecting.
Totally. And that just happens with most StyleGAN models to begin with, is that you always end up in a place where you're like, oh, I wasn't expecting it to look like this, but it could be useful. Yeah, you definitely need a lot of photos, and you need to train for like a decent amount of time. So what happens, and this is covered in the video, but there's a thing called transfer learning, where basically you're transferring from another model. So for the first 1,000 steps or whatever, you see like weird artifacts. You might see people's faces. That's a whole process that allows you to speed up the training. But yes, your first 1,000 steps are going to look really weird, depending on what you transfer from. A lot of that is covered in the video, and I talk about like what models to transfer from and what to choose from. So definitely recommend watching those. And then if you have more questions, like feel free to reach out to us.
I try it too. Like the first week, they open like the beta training option.
Yeah.
And I train it for like 5,000 or something. At some point it failed, but I download one of the like the steps. I retrain from that, and now it's uploaded, but it says that it's like 1,000, 2,000 from that. So the model works, but it retrains, so it doesn't say that it's like 6,000. I was super scared, like, oh, what is happening? Because I trained it for like, I don't know, some hours, was the beta. So at some point,
Yeah, so the other thing to know is the original version of the StyleGAN model in Runway was StyleGAN 1. Now they have an option where you can pick StyleGAN 1 or StyleGAN 2. I would say in 90% of cases, you should pick StyleGAN 2. It's just, it makes better images. It does train a little bit slower, but not too much slower. So I definitely would recommend playing with that. Again, I cover some of that in the videos. So if you are interested in that, take a look and let me know. To David's point, you can also train on top of a model you've already trained, so you can continue training. So if you run it for 3,000 steps and you're not happy, you can run it for another 3,000 or however many more you want. The only thing to know is that then the naming or the steps that it includes will change. So if you train it for 3,000 steps and it says a 3,000 step model, and you train it for another 3,000, it will still say 3,000, but you have to sort of mentally remember like, oh, it trained for longer than that. What I would probably recommend doing is changing the name of the model. And that way, like, it's a little, that way you remember it's like, oh, version 2 is actually 6,000 steps or whatever. Yeah.
One quick question, because I don't remember. When you train with a StyleGAN, like Tube, for example, in Runway right now, can you choose the size? Or because I think I train in 500 plus 500, but now I want to train in something like more landscape, and I don't know if there's an option or I need to like make the database in a square, and I didn't check it. It's just,
yeah. So you can pick the sizes, but the sizes are mostly predetermined. So what I would recommend for most folks is just pick the 1024 by 1024 model. That is the Faces high quality or like Faces HQ model. I would pick from those or that one just because it is the highest resolution. It will train a little bit slower. So unless you only have 256 by 256 images, I would still recommend training the largest size. To your question about landscape, there's sort of two approaches. One is you can pad the sides or top and bottom, right, with like black or white borders. The other is you can stretch it to just fit 1024 by 1024, and then on your output, like bring into Photoshop and squish it back down. Either of those works. It just sort of depends on what you want to do. Usually I find people like initially want to pad it just because then they don't have to do all that Photoshop work. So either of those would work, yeah. But you do have to make it square. If you don't make it square and you upload it to Runway, Runway will crop your images to square. That's just how they don't really tell you they do that, but that's what they do. So be aware of that because it can kind of come back to haunt you if you're not aware of that.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
I had a quickish question, I guess. I tried training, but I trained on a Colab notebook and I did some text training from one of Alison Parrish's tutorials. I was wondering, so that had kind of a inbuilt sort of feasibility that you could like export out your model and use it for later. So can we like do that sort of thing in Runway? Can you like save your model out and like plug it into other places to use it?
Yep, you can.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a video that covers that material. I'm just gonna make a note for myself to include that in our notes for class. Yeah, so yes, Runway is pretty nice in that they are fairly open and they allow you to take stuff out of their model or out of their system to use it in other places. It's a little buried in just where it exists, so just be aware of that, but it does exist, yeah. Cool. Any other questions about training? All right, we'll move on. So I would say again, like if you're really interested in training, watch the 2 videos we have on that material. And then just like either drop a note in our Slack channel or DM Lee or I, and we're happy to talk through it. Cool, so chaining. Chaining is actually one of my favorite parts of Runway. I think it's like it's a superpower that Runway has that like many other applications don't. So I'll talk a little bit about chaining and how it works, and we'll take a look at a really quick demo on how to use it. So chaining is basically the idea of putting 2 machine learning models together. So let's say you go from generating a StyleGAN images to captions of what those images are. So this is a really powerful tool because Runway allows you to do it in pretty much like a couple steps. Whereas if you don't have a Runway-like system, you have to set up like a whole chain of like machine learning. Like honestly, I wouldn't want to do it myself. So I think this is a really cool part of Runway and definitely a powerful tool. The one thing to remember is that you have to make sure that the output of your first model matches the input of your second model. We'll look at an example of that in just a minute, but essentially like you have to make sure that if the output is an image and the input from the other model has to be an image. Whereas it won't work if your output from the first model is an image, but your input for the next model is supposed to be text. So it's really important to sort of like keep the input-output system in mind because a lot of times you'll just set some stuff up and think it's going to work and it won't work and you won't be sure why, and it's usually this. So I have a whole video that covers a bunch of different types of chaining or different approaches. For this, I'm just going to do a quick demo of just like how it works and how to set it up. But go ahead and just check that out and sort of let me know what you think. This particular video will go under a bunch of different things. Cool. So let's just quickly walk through how to do some chaining. Okay, so again, the way that chaining works is chaining uses workspaces. So if you come in here and you sort of see like I have 1,000,001 workspaces here, the important thing is both of your models have to be inside of your workspace, inside the same workspace. So I'm just going to clean up some stuff here a little bit. So let's actually look at, so let's grab. So take a look at some models here. So let's try to find some models we want to put together. So I think one of the first things I'm going to do is let's use Big BiGAN. So for Big BiGAN, the output is an image and our input is an image. So we're going to start with the input here. And let's grab another model, BiGAN. So let's come back over here. So let's take, let's actually do image to text. So we're going to take the caption of our model. Oops. So yeah, that's right. Okay, so that's going to go there. And then let's use attention GAN. So again, attention GAN takes a text and generates an image from it. So we're going to add this to our workspace. Yeah, cool. All right, so what happened here? Added 10 models. Okay, so our chain here is going to be Big GAN. So we're going to create an image that looks like something in the Big GAN model. Then we're going to take that image and we're going to create a caption for it. Then we're going to use that caption to try to generate a brand new image. So this is going to be a little while, but we'll get this set up here. One thing to know is that when you run 3 models at one time, you're being charged for all 3 models. So the downside of this is that it's kind of expensive. So just be aware of that. So I'm just going to get this started here. Set up our 3 models. So these 3 models are now, I'm being charged what, 15 cents a minute? So that's not cheap. So I would definitely experiment with this in a cheap way. And then like as you get your tool chain figured out to do that. Okay, so let's figure out our input of a file here for an image. So let's just grab, yeah, that works. So we'll grab this like kind of crazy flower looking image. That's fine. We'll shrink down our images here. So now Big BiGAN is processing. So there's our image from this. That does not look anything like that. It looks like some weird mushrooms or whatever, which I guess maybe in its own way is reflective of that. So now we're producing an image. So we go to im to text. Now we need to set our input here. Instead of the normal input of like a file, we're going to actually set it to big BIGAN. So we're going to set this to this. So now that image is being pulled in from the model prior to it. And now we're seeing a text which says a bunch of different types of food on a table. So now we're going to take attention GAN and we're going to bring in im to text. So now we're going to use the text from the previous model and bring it in here. Now what's pretty nice here is actually like, you'll notice that it doesn't even let you set the image here. So it knows the inputs outputs. So you won't even be able to set it if the input outputs and inputs don't match. So here we go. Here we have our image here. So we're just getting grosser and grosser looking foods, I think, at this point. Now, what is really cool is you could also come up here and you could set your input to be attention GAN. So I don't know what's actually gonna happen here. It feels like it might be an infinite loop, but let's sort of see what happens. So now I'm bringing this in and now I get this image. So now I'm bringing it like, now we're doing like an infinite loop kind of thing. And if we click over to im to text, you'll see that it changes every time. It's really fast now. And over here, now we're generating our images. So this is a pretty cool and like fun way to like work with this stuff. And it's interesting like how fast it's getting. So now we have like a really interesting recursive loop. Like you just set a machine to like just do this forever and ever. And honestly, like to do this outside of Runway would be a huge pain in the ass. Like I can't even imagine trying to do it myself. So this is a really cool part of Runway. Allows you to do some really fun stuff and maybe like, you know, create some recursive loops like this, or even just play with like chaining different models together. So in the video, I do a couple other examples. So if you're interested in learning more, there's some other examples there. Any questions about the chaining models?
There is any way of downloading all that images at the same time that is like running?
Sorry, repeat your question.
Is possible to download all the images that are creating right now and we see like running at the same time that is running, or you need to like just click it and download it and click it and download it? Because it's super nice to create a video and the text with this.
Yeah, the one thing I would say here is that it's probably hard to capture this this sort of experience. You'd probably need to set up P5.js to like actually download the images as they come through. Runway recently updated their exports feature to like be a little bit, it works better if you just want to stay in Runway, but it's actually kind of hard to get like this sort of experience exported out. So in the next, like after our break today, we'll look at P5.js and you could probably set up a way to like download all these images. So then you could sort of like play it back almost like a video for people. Yeah.
Can you like set kind of time steps of like how often it should like take in data from the previous model or something like that, or will it like always do it kind of automatically?
Yeah, right now it's set up to just, I mean, I didn't even know you could do this until just now. So it's the first time that I'm actually playing with it. There's no like delay system within Runway. It just happens as quickly as it can. You could probably, again, like using P5.js, probably manage some things to like sort of add a delay, right? Because it's JavaScript, so you could add like a delay into your JavaScript and then do some of these things. So yeah, it's definitely like Runway is not yet there where you have like a full suite of like adding in like a delay component or other things just yet. But yeah, that's probably how I would approach it. Just gonna shut off these models before I lose more money. Cool, so that pretty much covers chaining. So let's see what time, oh, perfect. I think we're right on time here. So let's talk a little bit about plugins, plugins and or integrations. So as I talked about a little bit earlier, we'll be looking at P5.js today, but Runway actually has a suite of plugins or like tools that will work with other creative tools. So as of today, there are 2 official Runway plugins. There's one for, oh, that shouldn't say Runway, that should say Photoshop. You can edit here. So there's one for Unity and then there's one for Photoshop. So we'll look at the Photoshop plugin today, in part just because I don't use Unity. So if anyone happens to and wants to figure it out, let me know and I can like try to debug it with you. So these are two official plugins that basically like work directly with those platforms. There are lots of folks working on other plugins that are sort of like unofficial, meaning like a developer has just sort of taken it upon themselves to start building it. If you go into the Runway Slack and dig around a little bit, you'll find some people working on things. So I know for sure someone has created a Grasshopper plugin, which is Grasshopper for Rhino, if you're not familiar with that. I think I've seen some other people doing other 3D tools, other 3D plugins, that sort of thing. So if you are interested in like, I use this tool and I want to see if someone has this, but I think I saw someone, was it Sketch or Figma the other day? I think someone might have made like a Figma plugin for Runway. So if you are interested, check those out, or ask them that the Runway Slack, and they might be able to like point you to the right person. The other thing that Runway supports is they support like coding with other platforms. So processing, open frameworks, touch designer, any number of these like sort of other coding platforms can talk to Runway, usually over a network like a local host. So I think they can also do like some other different streaming systems. So if you're familiar with any of those, it's likely that Runway supports it. On this page, if you click this link, there are a bunch of samples and sample code for various platforms. So usually developers who work on touch designer or processing will have shared their sample code. So you can grab some of that and make sure that you can like sort of read through it and see if it works for you. I'll show you P5.js today just because like JavaScript tends to be the thing that I'm most familiar with. If you are interested in learning a little bit more about some of these other ones, I would probably recommend like just reaching out on the Runway Slack. You can ask me, but I don't really use Touch Designer that much, so I may be unhelpful there. Cool, and just like as the last thing, just make sure that like if your input's a model, your model accepts the input type that you're using, that sort of thing. So the Photoshop plugin, there's a plugin page. You go there and you can download the link. You can install the plugin. So I have a video here that will describe all of the process for this and walk you through some of the steps. I won't go through it today because it's just, I know not everyone uses Photoshop, so I don't want to waste anyone's time, but it exists there. This is the process for most plugins, which is like you download it, then you have to install it. The installation process is probably different on every different system. With Photoshop in particular, you can send individual layers from Photoshop to Runway, and they come back as a new layer in Photoshop. So just remember that this sends a single layer from Photoshop to Runway. So if you're going to mess with like multiple layers, you have to sort of like flatten them or merge your layers in order to be able to send stuff back and forth. What's nice here is it does like, it like sends it and immediately comes back, or it comes back as soon as it's done running. So like it saves you a little bit of time, right? It saves you a couple minutes because you don't have to save out an image, upload it to Runway, download that image, and then bring it back into Photoshop. It saves you a couple minutes that way. So it's pretty nice. Because it's Photoshop, you can only use image inputs and image outputs. So like using im to text isn't really gonna work, right? You can send an image, but like getting text back probably isn't gonna help you. Or I don't think it even supports giving you text back. So you might think that that would be a nice way to like caption some images, but unfortunately it doesn't work that way. I don't think it works that way. Also, output resolution is really apparent. So for example, in Big ByGAN's output is 256 by 256. So if you send it an image that is a different size, it's going to squish it down to that size and then send you back a thumbnail. So just know that like sometimes things won't work out the way you expect them to. I think in the demo I show in that video that like I send it a rectangular image and I get back a square image that's clearly been like squished and stuff. So just be aware that some of these models have small little like things that will frustrate you, but that's just how they are sometimes. So as I mentioned, there's the video here that will walk you through installing. Installing the Photoshop plugin isn't impossible. It's just there is a little bit of a trick in that like the folder you're supposed to install it in might not exist. So you have to go and make it. I cover all that in this video. So take a look at it and let me or Leah know if you have any questions. But it should be everything you need. Cool. And with that, any questions about plugins or working with other applications?
Derek, I linked a tweet in the chat, which I thought is the Figma plugin you're talking about. but I was curious nonetheless because I work with Figma and Han.
Oh, yeah, let's see.
Also, I was curious, what are the models that do the 3D, like Unity or Touch Designer based work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not really sure, to be honest. I think like a lot of times what it is, you're doing like texture mapping. So you send a texture or an image to Unity and you get back like a texture for your model. I think the example they also use in that is getting edges. So you send it the 3D view and you get back like an edge detection sort of system. Yeah, I will say in some cases, like it's not clear to me how you use these. Because I'm not really a Unity person, I'm not entirely sure like all the potential applications of it. Yeah, I mean the Photoshop one makes sense because like I was sort of like skeptical. I was like, oh, this seems fine, but like it did actually save me a couple minutes. So I was like, oh, I can see why someone would use this. So yeah, it's so much just like people make these things and then you have to figure out like how would I use this, or what would my process be for these. Yeah, it looks like, so you look, this link is cool. It's so it looks like GPT-3 to Figma. Takes a URL and a description to mock up a website for you. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so I don't know, this seems pretty, I've seen a lot of people doing stuff with GPT-3 to like generate websites. I don't know what exactly that means, but it looks cool. So yeah, I'll add this link to our notes and add it to the Slack channel as well, because it looks cool.
Yeah, if you find the other Figma plugin you were talking about, I'd be interested in that.
Cool, yeah, I'll look around. All right, so why don't we take a break? Let's come back at 16 after, and we'll do the second half class. Cool? All right, see everybody in 5 minutes. All right, hey everybody. Yeah, I realized I didn't ask you this, but do you want to cover the lecture part of interpolation, then I'll do the demo?
Sure, that sounds good.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can get started.
Okay. Hey, so we're going to talk about interpolation, which is another thing you can do with a model once you've already had it trained. Sort of what interpolation is that I think we've detailed before that StyleGAN itself has this high dimensional space that has 512 different dimensions. And yeah, within the Runway UI, it looks like this 2D grid for any model that that has vector input. They'll sort of visualize that big high dimensional space in this nice 2D grid for you guys to explore. What each of those points actually corresponds to is one of those points in that higher dimensional space, and each point will correspond to generating a different kind of image. So this point here might correspond to this guy, and then this point here might correspond to this person here. And what linear interpolation is literally just taking this point and then moving along this line and generating each image for each of the corresponding points along this line. So that will look like this, where it smoothly moves from here to over there. So with linear interpolation, you can specify generally like which points it interpolates between. So you would specify in this case like these 4 points. When you're doing interpolation, there's usually an equal number of frames for each of these legs. So what that means is like maybe for this leg, since this leg is really long, and then in that case, the speed might feel a little uneven, especially like when comparing this leg, the really short one, to the really long one, if you only have maybe like 30 frames for each leg. Yeah, and then there's an option to set looping to true, which means it'll just like, if you input 4 frames, it'll make sure that this last leg completes the entire loop. And that's how you'll get like those cool morphing videos that you generally see with like Stallion work. Derek, I'll let you take it from here.
Cool, yeah. So we'll look at a demo here on how to do this in Runway using P5JS. So let me just share my screen here real quick. Oops. All right, so if you've never used P5JS before, it's a fairly straightforward like system. What we're going to do is we're just going to look at one example of how to do this linear interpolation. So we're just going to set some points that we find in Runway, and then we're going to use JavaScript and P5JS to actually interpolate across them. So the process for this will essentially be start your model in Runway, and then you're going to edit your variables inside of JavaScript. I know not everyone knows JavaScript in here, so I don't want anyone to feel like this is too difficult for them. We're just I'll talk about what each of the variables is, and then you don't need to touch anything else. You're then gonna run the P5JS script. This will download a bunch of images to your desktop, and then you will have to convert them to a video from there. You used to be able to record a video directly in Runway. Unfortunately, they've changed that so that you now have to do it sort of outside the system, which is fine. You can record that, like there's basically a command called ffmpeg you can use if you want to convert it to video, or you could bring it into After Effects and do like a video sequence to generate your images, or your video, excuse me. So this is the ffmpeg command. I'll cover it in a minute in our demo. You do have to have ffmpeg installed, which most people probably do via whatever like tools they're already installing on their computer. If you don't, let me know and I can link you to a video on how to install ffmpeg. Cool, so let's take a look at the demo. So the first thing we're gonna do inside Runway is, so I grabbed one of my StyleGAN models. So the first thing you wanna do is actually just find a couple images that you wanna interpolate between. So we're gonna run this model. And we're just gonna grab some images using the vector input. Really should have started this up while Leo was talking.
Derek, remind me the truncation,
Yeah.
with that variable.
Yeah, so truncation essentially, what it ends up being is how realistic the image looks. So if you set your truncation to be really high, you'll get weirder looking images. If you set it to be lower, you'll get, like if you set it to 0, you'll actually get the exact same image everywhere. So it should be, yeah, you'll see it, it's the exact same image everywhere. If you set it, you know, to 0.5, you'll get a different set of images. So basically it's like diversity plus realism. So the smaller the number is, the lower the diversity, but also the more realistic those images look. The higher the number, the more diverse your images are, but also the more likely that they are to look kind of weird. So this is my Bone model, which I usually talk about in other classes, but probably haven't forced you guys to experience yet. But this is the famous internet cat bone bone. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm just going to grab a couple of these images that I like and I want to see interpolate between. So the way to get vectors to use this is you're just going to click on this image and then you're going to come over here and you're going to click Save Vectors. So when you click Save Vector, it's going to save out that exact point in space. So if we click on this, this is now the vector. So if I open this inside of a text editor, you'll see this is just a very, very long string of numbers. So this is 512 numbers between -1 and 1. And that is just the vector value for this. There we go. So that's all. This is this big long thing you don't need to worry about, but that's basically what it is. So I've grabbed vector. Let's come in and grab another. So we'll do 3 images. We'll rotate between 3 images. So we'll grab this one in the middle, which is, this is our bone there. And then we'll scroll around a little bit and see if we can find another bone image. One thing to note is that your images have to be of all the same truncation value. Because we're going to interpolate in a space and the truncation value has to stay pretty simple. Like it has to be the exact same. So make sure you don't play with this and then download it and be surprised when you get different images. So this is a good one, a bone with some grass behind him. So let's download this one. All right, so now I have 3 vectors. The P5JS script is here. I'll link to it in our notes as well. I think it's also in the video example and in the slide deck. All you're going to look at here are truncation value. So we've got a bunch of variables here. I'll go over this long string of code, which you can imagine is what those vectors are. If you do know JavaScript and you want to look at the code's below here. But basically anything below here, if you don't want to touch the JavaScript code, you don't have to worry about. Everything we can touch is above here. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the truncation value. So I believe I was using 5 in Runway. Yes, I was using 5. So I'm going to set that to 5. The next thing is how many frames do I want between each of these images. So like if I'm using 3 and I have 60 frames and I've set loop to true. So loop will be, it'll go back to the first one I provided. This is going to be, I think that would mean 240 frames. So I'm going to leave this at 60 for now. This might be a little bit of a slow process, but we'll sort of see. I'm going to set this to 45 just to save us a little bit of time. Set loop to true, that means it's going to loop to the back one. I always recommend doing that if you want to post to Instagram, because then it feels like it's always looping and it's like an hour long, and you'll get a nice view count for it. Download images. So for this, we want to set to true. Because of the new Runway changes, we have to set this to download on our desktop, which might be a little crazy, but just so you know, like that's what you have to do. Height and width. So height and width are the height and width of your model. So you'll see here it's 1024 by 1024. So you're going to put 1024 by 1024 here. The last and by far the worst step of this is you're going to have to paste in those vectors. So I'm going to come over here. I'm just going to grab these 2 vectors. I'm going to open them inside of Sublime Text. If you don't have a code editor, Sublime Text is free, so you can download that and use that. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to come in here and you're just going to, actually the first thing I'm going to do, and the first thing I recommend doing is just going into the let vectors. So this is just saying, what are my vectors? Go in here and just clean this out. So you want to delete, you don't want to delete the last bracket, but you want to delete these, everything in between those 2 brackets. You'll see here you have a bracket and a bracket. So that just means it's closed. Make sure you don't delete those 2, otherwise you will get an error. So just come in here and Command All, Command C. So just copying that vector and then paste it in. And yes, it will be very long, and yes, it will look like a mess of stuff. Don't worry about it. The only thing you need to do after this is hit comma. Make sure you insert a comma, otherwise you will get an error. So now we're going to go look at those other 2 vectors. So let's go into this one, and let's grab this one and hit Command C, Command V, so copy paste, and the last vector. Cool. And for the last vector, you don't need a comma after it. It's just to separate out those values. So now I have 3 vectors in here. So we're pretty much all set to go here. This is everything you need to edit within this script. The one thing you do need to make sure that your Runway model is still running. Your Runway model has to be running in order to access this script. So basically what it's doing behind the scenes, if you're interested and more technical, is it's talking over your localhost. So it's just querying localhost 8000. And it basically pings the the Runway server with what the vector is you want to get, it then sends an image back using that vector. And we're going to download these. I'm just going to clean up. I know I demoed this earlier. Oh, I already cleaned up. Cool. Okay, so we're all set to go here. So as long as your Runway model is on, you're ready to go. Coming back to P5JS, you're just going to hit play. And what's going to happen is you're going to start to see all of your images display here in the preview, but then you're also going to get a ton of downloads into your download folder. So just be aware of that. We'll deal with that in just a second. Oh, what's going on here? Sometimes this happens. This was just working this morning. Of course, live demos never work the way you expect them to. Let's try and see if this works better in Firefox. So actually, let's just save. Okay. I have had experiences where this works better in Firefox and doesn't Chrome, but I tried it this morning. It worked fine. So we'll see what happens here. All right, so I'm just going to paste in all my code with those new vectors in here and the new settings. Let's see if this works better now. So Runway is not running anymore, so let's run this remotely. I tend to find sometimes when you get errors that it forces the Runway model to stop, so make sure that this is back on. Cool, so now we're back on over here. So I'm gonna come back over here and hit play. Of course, this won't work for me today. All right, let's do one other thing to check here. All right, let's try this one more time. There we go. Okay, now magically it works. So what you're seeing here now is all of your images are downloading to your desktop, your downloads folder. I believe you can set this in Chrome, so if you really wanted to save it to another place, you could. Now, what's important to know is that this download isn't really in real time, right? So like you're not actually getting a video output. You'll see it takes about 1 second for every one of these images to interpolate. But if you watch in Runway, you can see it's like slightly changing, right? Like Bone's face is shifting a little bit now. The reason this model looks this particular way, and I've covered this in some other classes, is Bone has a pose, like Bone works its angles, and this is the angle that Bone knows how to work. So basically what you're seeing here is like the model has learned really, really well how to like focus on Bone's face, but all the other images are different backgrounds or different body poses. So it doesn't really know how to do the rest of it. So it has this really like cool, I really like this model because it has this really interesting of like the faces like almost like hyper realism, and then everything else is abstract. So it's kind of funny how it works out because of Bone's like perfect angle photograph that is always used on Instagram. All right, so it looks like we're finished downloading here. Is that right? Nope, still downloading a couple. So if you are in P5JS, it'll also at the bottom here in the console tell you how many images it's generating. So we're going to generate a total of 135 images. That's because we've got three transition points and 45 frames per point. So that ends up being 135. I always do the math wrong here. Almost finished here. Cool, and there we go. So I'm gonna open this inside of Finder. And you'll see I've got all of these images and they're all labeled step 0135 down to 0000. So in Mac, there's just a nice little feature here that says new folder with selection. That moves them all into a little folder here. And I'm going to call this bone bone. So now we have an image sequence here. You could bring this into After Effects if you want to. There's a nice little trick using some little code here. There's FFmpeg. So I'm just going to grab this line of code here. So inside of terminal, again, like if this freaks you out, don't worry about it. I can walk you through the steps at a later point if you're interested. What we're going to do is we're going to move into this folder. So I'm actually going to make this bigger here. Make my type bigger so everyone can see it. So we're going to CD. That just means change directory. So we're going to move into that bone folder. And then we're going to take our code from here. So we're just going to copy and paste this. So what does this say? So this says use FFmpeg to generate a video that has a frame rate of 24 frames. So I'm actually going to change this to be a little bit lower because this is going to be really fast otherwise. So I'm going to make it 12 frames per second. Your input is a step. It's a file called step and then a 4-digit number and then PNG. So again, if we look at this folder, you'll see inside of here, there is 000 all the way to 135. So all it's saying is like go in order from this all the way to this because it's a 4-digit number. You're going to use a codec, don't worry about that. And then you're going to give it an output name. So I'm just going to name this bone linear. Cool, so that's ready to go. So once it's in, you just hit return and it's going to generate your video. And here's bone linear. So because these images are pretty straightforward, like they're pretty similar, it feels pretty slow with the transition between these. If you have a lot of like crazy different images and you transition between those, it'll feel a lot faster. I'm actually gonna put this into our Slack channel because I'm sure that that was choppy and you couldn't really see it. So I'll upload this here. That get uploaded? Oh, there we go. It's uploading. So once it's uploaded, you can go ahead and take a look at it. That's the bone video. So that covers everything we want to do for linear interpolation. So I'm just going to hit stop. Come back to our slides here. And just mention that there are a couple other types of interpolations. I won't cover them, the videos, videos of them. I won't cover it in this class, but if you're interested, there's one that's called a noise loop, which is just basically like you do some crazy noisy stuff like looping through the latent space. This one's a little bit easier in that you don't need to set a bunch of interpolation points. So if you just want to make a cool video, this is one way to do it. This basically starts in a random place. It moves around sort of semi-randomly, but it always comes back to the same. So the controls here are a diameter and the number of frames. So there's no like, I'm setting the vector that it's going to start with. It starts with a random vector pretty much always. Diameter basically means like how wide is it and how narrow is it. So in this case, it's, oops. So like a narrow diameter would be like something like this, right? It's in a tiny space, whereas a large diameter would be something like this. So it's like sort of, it's metaphorical rather than it is like actually a real thing, but it exists if you're interested in it. You can also, like, because we're just using vector data, if you are using generative art or processing or those sort of things and you're used to generating values generatively or randomly, you can also control it from other sources. So you could take a CSV, you could take audio, you could take text in. There's a good example of a text version that I will link to that one of our former students, Miauko, did. Oh, her name, her Instagram name is Miauko. Her actual name is Naoko. I just always know her as that. But she made a really cool like little website where you put in a piece of text and it generates an image from it. So I'll link to that as well. The real key here is that you need to map whatever your data is to a Z vector. So that's the big challenge there, is making sure that your data can be mapped to some vector. And that's sort of like a lot of generative art does that. So if you're familiar with that, you can do that as well. So there's a video here that this goes through like a bunch of different interpolation options. Each of these also has a JavaScript file alongside of it. So if you want to play with those, you can. But I thought I just would show you the process of doing one. And then if you want to take it and play with more of them, there's more options on in this video as well.
Just a question. Is it possible to do interpolation through like sort of like two models are chained together? So I did StyleGAN, then I don't know, mask RCNN or anything like that. Is it possible to chain them and then using P5 interpolate through the vectors?
Yeah, so you would need to interpolate in one model and then have it chained to the other model and then get back those images. I think that would work. One thing that you would have to check on, and I think what would change is that if you added a second model, let's just try this here actually really quickly. Let's add attention GAN. So I think what will happen here is this one will be on this network and this will be on a different network. It doesn't say it is. I think you have to check to see like where it's coming, where you're getting it sent, the value sent to. That would probably be the only challenge. I haven't really done that before, but I think it should technically work, I believe. I just don't know if you're gonna have to like if you're gonna have to watch a second local host network.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
So Tomby asked in the chat, how many images would you ideally need in the data set? So I cover this in one of I have a whole video on data set stuff that I recommend watching. A lot of that discussion is covered there, but I will say, generally at the bare minimum, you want about 500 images. 1,000 is better, but 500 is doable. Basically, the lower your image values are, the more likely you are to get a thing called overfitting, which means it basically memorizes the images it sees, and then it doesn't really like do interpolation well. It just like bounces, it like flickers between different states. So the more images you have, the better off you'll be. But I know that is like definitely the biggest challenge about a lot of this work. And I'll also just say, actually, you know what, we're going to talk about this later. So I won't shout up our own classes later. Any other questions about interpolation or training?
So,
sorry. No, Tomby, go on.
Oh, my question was, so when you scraped Bonbon's Instagram, did you like just do the entire feed?
Yes. So again, I sort of cover this, not to like be like watch the video, but like in the video I cover a much better like example of how to do this, which is basically like you scrape the entire feed and then you go through each frame individually. I have some tools that will help automate that, but you do essentially go through each image and clean it and like delete the ones that are not the right ones. So yeah, it's like a pretty it's a grueling process. So again, because we decided to make this class a bit shorter, I decided to skip on that because that is the biggest challenge about this class. So yeah. Yesenia.
Yeah, so just to make sure, is the JSON generated from Runway that you put in the P5 editor available for customized data sets that we upload? Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So like this, I mean, so basically the JSON you get out of this model is just the vectors, and the vectors, if you train your own model, you will always get your own vector out of it.
Okay.
Cool. So you're basically like getting this from a custom. So I trained Bonebone on Runway. So it's the same thing. You'll get the custom values out of it, and you'll be able to access and talk to it with your custom model as well.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm the only one that I had like 10 workspaces on Runway last week that I was like checking models, and with the last actualization or update they are not there. I don't know where they are.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So I don't know if I'm the only one.
I saw someone else mention that in the Slack, in the Runway Slack this week, another one of my students who said that. So I don't know what's going on there. It didn't happen to me, which isn't to say that like, you know, it doesn't happen. I'm sure it happened. The thing about workspaces is that you can just rebuild them. Like it definitely is painful, but you can do it. Like you don't lose any data when a workspace is lost. So just, yes, it sucks that you have to remake it, but hopefully nothing is super important was lost in that.
Yeah, I hope I already download everything, so.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then Arnav had a question of, can one use a video file as a data set? Yes, you can. And in fact, I have a video on converting a video to a series of frames that I'll link to as well. Just gonna make a note here. for myself to do that. One thing you'll notice, and I think I might talk about this in one of the training videos, or maybe I talk about it somewhere else. I'll find out where. When you use a video as a data set, it tends to just basically repeat the video. Like because the frames are clustered like really close together. So what I might recommend is actually doing something where you reduce the frame rate. So like you only take every second frame or whatever, or sorry, every 1 frame per second of your video. And that'll give you a little bit more of a diverse data set. What basically happens when you use a video is like it learns sort of the video, like it'll learn little sequences of video and then it'll jump to a different sequence, which is pretty cool, but it feels a little bit different than like training on static images. So just be aware of that. But yeah, it can definitely use a video as a data set.
Eric, I saw some. Yeah, I saw some animations that you had recently posted tagged with network bending, and I was just curious if this was similar to that.
It's similar in the sense that like it's a sequence of videos, but or a sequence of frames. Network bending is not really possible inside of Runway or inside of P5.js because of how you need access to those things. I'm actually going to do a video probably this week on network bending, and it's in a collab notebook. So basically what you could do is you could train a model in Runway and then download the pickle file and then bring that pickle file over to Colab to do that technique. But yeah, it's a little bit more advanced than Runway can handle at the moment. Any other questions? Cool. All right. I'm going to quickly jump through. I think we might be able to stay on time, but let's see here. Hosted models. So hosted models are a way for, oops, hold on. I'm not sharing my screen yet, am I? Cool. Okay. So hosted models. Runway added this feature maybe a couple of months ago. It basically allows you to take one of the models that you built in Runway and put it on a web page. So the traditional way to do this outside Runway is very, very painful and very expensive. With Runway's hosted model setup, it's a little bit cheaper, but it could become expensive if people like really use your website a lot. Basically, you sort of there's a setting inside Runway to like host a model on their system. You'll need to give it a web page and like write some JavaScript on how to manage it. But the cost for that is 1 cent per request. So anytime someone pings Runway from your website, it will cost you 1 cent. So it's cheaper than like just leaving a machine on forever, right? Because if like no one visits your website for 12 hours, you're not going to be charged for that time. But what it also means is like if your web page goes on Reddit or like goes viral on somewhere and lots of people use it, it can still be really, really expensive. So just be aware of those issues, but it is like a pretty nice feature that they can allow you to do this. So say you're going to run like an art exhibit, or you're going to run your web page for like a day as like a part of like a net art kind of experience. This would be a nice way to do that because it's like you don't have to set up all the infrastructure behind the scenes. So there's basically the process for this is you need to work with a working P5.js model. I definitely recommend that you already have your P5.js script working directly with Runway. You're then going to download those files. You're going to add the JavaScript SDK, which is the Runway setup to do this, to your index file. You're going to add a model URL and token to your sketch.js file. And lastly, you're going to update your HTTP posts to model query. If that doesn't make any sense to you, that's fine, because I have a video that walks through the entire thing. This definitely requires some knowledge of JavaScript and some knowledge of websites. So it's not like it just like will immediately work for you. But this, I think that this video will cover a lot of the details. So again, I would just say watch it and let us know if you have questions. But this is pretty much it. So like the thing to know is that like if your web page gets thousands upon thousands of hits, you can have a pretty hefty bill at the end. So just be aware of that. Maybe set up like, if you're going to set it to run for a day, like maybe just keep an eye on it. There is a way inside of the Runway model, inside the hosted models, to see how much you're being charged. Someone has a question. Oh yeah, cool. So Tom B's one to help if anyone has JavaScript questions, which would be great. Cool, so that covers hosted models. Obviously this is pretty basic and pretty straight. Like I just threw this at you. So don't expect, does anyone have any immediate questions based on this? I assume you'll have more questions after you watch the video, so don't really expect anyone to immediately. Cool, okay. Yeah, as always, ask questions in the Slack channel after watching this. Okay, so we have, what, like 10 minutes left? Perfect, okay. So we have 10 minutes left. Obviously, this is the last class. I hope you enjoyed this class. It's been a lot of fun for me just to sort of see everyone working on stuff and having lots of questions. I'm sure that in 3 weeks, there's a lot to throw at people, so I totally understand if you're like, I'm still digesting and I don't yet know if I enjoyed this class or not. Totally fair. We have a survey, so you're welcome to fill it out whenever you want. You're also welcome to set up one-on-one times with Leah or I at any point, and we'll talk you through more things. If you want to learn more after this class, we have a bunch of machine learning resources available to you. So as you've heard me suggest, like, oh, I have a video on that. Oh, I have a video on that. I do have a YouTube channel. And it has a lot of additional sources outside of this class. Leah and I have taught 2 other classes. Well, we've taught a bunch of other classes, but we've taught 2 in particular that I think will be interesting to this group. The first is our video, like a video series called AI 2.1. This is basically maybe the next iteration of this class, which is like taking it outside of Runway and doing some things on servers and other things. We'll use a thing called Paperspace in this class. All 5 videos from that class are available online. You're welcome to watch them at any time and then let me or Leah know if you have questions, and we'll walk you through some things. This will be a little bit more in depth, so it won't touch on like a bunch of different models. It'll touch on maybe a handful of models and go deep into those. So pix-to-pix, CycleGAN, style transfer, and StyleGAN. The other class we have is called the StyleGAN Deep Dive class. This is one we finished maybe a couple months ago. And it's sort of like an advanced class. It's all things StyleGAN. Although I have to caveat that in that, like in the past 3 months, there's been a lot of updates to StyleGAN. So like there's more stuff than even that video this series covers. This is 5 weeks as well. So this will go like into making data sets, training stuff. Like it's a pretty deep class. We'll show you lots of different things. Also, it'll show you like how to, a bunch of different crazy ways to create interpolations and do audio reactive work and that sort of thing. This will be a mix of using what's called GCP, which is a Google Cloud platform. So training on that, downloading your models and then bringing them to Colab to a bunch of like Colab experiments with creating images and videos and other things out of it. This one probably requires a little bit more like knowledge, but I hope it's still pretty straightforward. We try to teach all of our classes so that like, even if you don't know how to code, you can like sort of pick up just enough to be able to do it. And then we do have a couple other classes coming up in the rest of the year. Our Colab class is sold out, so we are out of spots for that. We might be willing to make an exception for 1 or 2 people. If you like desperately need to take the class, let us know. But I can't like assure you of anything. All these videos go up like maybe a month or 2 after the class is over. So if you can't make this class, you're always welcome to check out the videos at a later date. In September, we have a class that's going to be 3 weeks all about data sets. So if you're particularly interested in sort of the data set conversation we've been having about how to make a data set, how do you find images, how do you scrape things, we'll be doing a whole class around that. Both the Colab and the data set classes are brand new. Like we haven't taught anything like this before. So they'll be pretty in-depth and they'll like cover a lot more than we've covered in other materials and in other videos. And then in October, we're going to do a StyleGAN 2 class that's mostly focused on training. There's some new updates that I've been working on for StyleGAN 2 that make it even better. So we'll cover new stuff then. So there will be some new things there. So if you're interested in going deep into StyleGAN 2, that's available as well. Okay, non-classes that Leah and I teach, there are some ML art videos online. I recommend checking out the Runway videos. So Runway runs their own video series. They're pretty short. I would say they don't go super in depth, but they're like just sort of overviews of things. Gene Kogan does all those. Gene Kogan also runs a website called ML for Art. He doesn't really update as much as he used to, but he does have a bunch of materials on there about like various models and various ways to do ML art. There's a full class that he taught at ITP from about 2 years ago that's probably worth watching if you're interested in sort of expanding beyond like these classes tend to be more image and video focused. He'll do a lot more like text training or pose detection and other things. So maybe some interesting stuff there. And then lastly, Dan Schiffman runs a YouTube channel called Coding Train. And there's a series or two on Runway and then on ml5.js that you can check out. So Coding Train is like all things generative art, meaning processing, P5.js, like a bunch of other different, making your own websites, like those sort of things. We just have a couple series, particularly on machine learning. So I would definitely recommend checking those out. Yes, and Dan rocks. Dan is like, his videos are very funny. He's got a personality. So definitely check out his videos. Okay, if you are not interested, or if you're interested in learning more about the sort of theory of machine learning and like maybe the non-art side of it, here are the videos that I generally always recommend to people. So first off is the Fast AI series. Rachel and Jeremy run those two, and they're like both professors in San Francisco. I really like their approach because it's very much like this class where it's like just make some stuff and learn from making. There's 2 video series for each of those. They mostly work off notebooks. So if you learn a little bit of Colab, you can run all that stuff in Colab and follow along with them. This will get pretty deep into how machine learning works. It's like very like, it's hands-on, but like it goes into like all the little details of machine learning that I sort of gloss over in this class. MIT Deep Learning is a series of videos from like MIT, obviously. MIT and Stanford tend to be the 2 big schools for machine learning. You know, the 2 big schools for all things computer programming, but especially for machine learning. This deep learning series is nice in that it's not really code or math-based. It's just a lot of videos of like, here's how a thing works. So you can get sort of a high-level understanding of certain machine learning stuff. Andrew Ng's Coursera class is like the most famous like machine learning class on the internet. It is like kind of mathy, but it's like still accessible. So probably worth checking that one out if you're really interested. And then another one is a video person. There is the Deep Learning with Python book from Francois Cholet. And that is my favorite, that's like one of my favorite books because he's the guy who created Keras, which is, if you don't know, is a machine learning framework. But he's also like, the way he writes is very accessible. So he'll go like each chapter is a different type of model. Some of them will be GANs, some of them will be text training models, like that sort of thing. But he writes them in a very accessible way, and then there's a lot of code samples. So you'll find that a lot of machine learning stuff tends to be very, very math heavy, or you know, writing out the math function that does this thing. I tend to avoid those classes because I don't really understand that math that well. So this stuff is a mix of things where I feel like it's accessible enough that you could sort of, even if you don't know how to code or like don't know math, like you could learn from these series. Leah, do you want to talk about some of these people?
Oh yeah. So surrounding like ML art, there's generally like a pretty active community. Yeah, of course you can like feel free, and we strongly encourage you guys to keep using our Slack and ask the people in our community. People are generally like very helpful. There's also this creative AI newsletter sent out by this woman, Luba Elliott. She's kind of like she curates and organizes like AI art stuff. But generally, like every couple months, she'll send out a digest of like, here are all the latest happenings in the ML art world, and will contain like little short snippets and bullet points. On Twitter, there are all of these people. You can see Chris is there. He's the founder of Runway, or the co-founder. Separated into coders who I think like if you need specific coding advice, they have been pretty friendly and keen to helping people. Artists, these artists here are sort of more like big sort of established AI artists. Gene Kogan's in there. And Luba Elliott is linked to, and then ML Music. Derek and I are not like super into audio generated ML music, but these are a couple of places to start of like people to follow.
Cool, yeah. So all of these groups sort of intermingle. The difference between an artist and a coder is very nebulous. I would say some of these people swap sides depending on what they're doing every day. So I would say start with this list and just maybe follow some people on Twitter and see how it goes. And then from there, like decide like if you want to dive deep in someone else's work. A lot of these people also talk about other artists that they're following, or talk to the people, and you can sort of build up a very like strong community. I would say especially the Style GAN and Big GAN community is like really, really strong right now, because lots of people are building their own models, like tweaking networks, that sort of thing. So you'll learn a lot about those if you're interested in that. Obviously this last week of class, there's really no assignments for the rest of the week. I will say we have a survey, so please fill this out. We'll link to it again in the Slack channel as well. Let us know what you would want to see more of in this class, what you want to see less of. We try to take this feedback very, very seriously. The reason we actually have this class in a 3-week setting without training is that previous classes that we've taught, they said, hey, I feel like the data set and training stuff was too hard, and I would have liked to focus just on the models inside of Runway. So that's sort of what this class ended up being. Let us know if that worked for you, if not. It is definitely a challenge of like, do we include training or not? But yeah, please let us know any feedback. If you thought the class were too short, too long, not enough breaks, too many breaks. Like, we try to take all this feedback pretty seriously, and we're constantly iterating on these classes. So if you have feedback for us, let us know. So that's pretty much it for this class. I just want to say thank you so much for everybody. Yeah, so also Tommy added Jason Levine, which is great. He's a music person and does some really cool stuff. I hope you enjoyed this class. You know, whether or not you find that you enjoyed machine learning art is its own thing. Hopefully you learned whether or not you did. As always, you're always welcome to reach out to Lee or I with more questions or whatever. We're happy to help. Yeah, so it is 2 o'clock. We made it just in time. Does anyone have any questions based on everything we showed this week? Thoughts about class, like whatever?
I was just going to ask about your one-to-ones.
Yeah.
It looks like you're like, I don't know if you're booked up, but like there's no like slot to book.
Okay. Let me,
maybe it's closed.
For either of us. Okay, I'll look at that.
Yeah.
Maybe
Okay,
it's just a setting I need to change inside of Calendly, but yeah.
No worries. Thank you.
Any other questions, thoughts?
So I'm very curious about ML music now that I can see there are people doing it. So I don't know if there's something to do with music on Runway. I guess not, because I was looking, but I couldn't find. And yeah, I'm very curious about that, especially for paisagism. I don't know how to say it in English, but is to capture sounds from the surroundings.
Yeah. Environmental. There's definitely a term for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so Runway doesn't have any music models at the moment. My guess is that they could add it. I don't know, you know, Runway as a startup, they are trying to build a stronger user and a larger user base, and maybe they're deciding that music isn't a part of their user base just yet, or maybe there's just a bunch of you know, limits, or like they're a very small team. They're like 5 people, so they can only spend their time in so many areas. The ML music stuff is sort of starting to take off a little bit. There's a Google team called Magenta that is focusing on music and audio stuff. So they're doing some interesting things. There's also a new project from OpenAI. OpenAI are the people that made GPT-3. So if you're seeing the internet blow up about GPT-3, that's OpenAI's project. They also did a project a couple months ago called Jukebox AI, which is almost like a style GAN for music. So you feed it in an audio thing, and then it like learns the music, and it like spits back something that is like that music, but not the same. So I believe there's an interface. Yeah, I think there's an interface to play with that live on OpenAI's site. Some of the issues with music stuff is music's a little bit harder in that this gets into the history of GANs, but image GANs are basically built on the back of like computer vision, which has been a field for like 30 years. Music has not had a large of a field of like study and those sort of things. Like there's a lot of like you'll hear Fourier, fast Fourier transforms, or like FFTs. Like there are ways to explore music, but it hasn't been like linked to the machine learning model community as quickly as images did. I think that's starting to change now. We're seeing a lot more stuff being done. I actually ended up using a music machine learning model this week that I just posted some videos to my Instagram that basically figure out pitch detection of a song. So it's trained on pitches and like we've learned all the pitch detection. So there are more and more music models coming out. I just think the Runway interface isn't necessarily set up to handle those just yet, but that might change in the future.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
You should reach out to Jason, or like if you need a contact, I can definitely hit him up too. He's super friendly and like really
yeah.
honest.
Yeah, Jason and I are on Twitter together, but I also I've seen him perform and he's got some really amazing performance videos of his work. So I would definitely check out Jason's work. There's a bunch of people, it's just not the area that I really know a lot about. So if you are interested, I would definitely start following some of those folks. I'll say, shoot, who is it? Molly Herndon and her partner, Matt Dryhurst, just started a video series on Patreon that is sort of about the future of the music industry. And it touches a lot on AI because, Spotify, if you're not familiar, Spotify is has an AI lab, and the sort of pessimistic view of that lab is that they are going to generate music themselves and therefore eliminate musicians. The other way to think about that is that's a far off future, but one potential reality of what they do. But they have a really cool Patreon series. It's I think you pay $5 a month and you get access to all their videos. And they interview a new person every week. And I would say half of them have to do with AI. So lots of really cool stuff there to learn from if you're interested in that. And I will post a link to that as well. Cool. So I think that'll pretty much wrap up class. Just to reiterate, you are always welcome to talk to Leah or I in Slack. You can also follow us on social media and ask us questions there. Yeah, and I hope you got something out of this class, even if it wasn't everything you expected it to be. I hope you learned a little bit. And again, we always welcome feedback on things. So with that, I hope to see you on Slack or on the internet. And hope everyone has a good and healthy rest of the year. Cool.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Derek and Leah.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you all.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Derek. Bye.
Bye.